Okay. Welcome, everybody, to Paradialectic, where we end up talking about the dynamic range between extremes in humanity, personality, the world, and why that's so hard to navigate. So it's been about 3 weeks since we've met. How have you been over that time?
I have been, that says that there is a little error. Okay. I have been my best when I'm my best, and certainly not my worst when I'm my worst. So I think that's pretty good.
Good, good. Yeah, I got a little bit of traveling in. Some friends and I got some COVID tests, and we ended up going down to Kentucky, had an amazing time, and came back, got another COVID test, and all clear, responsible, and good to have proof of that responsibility. So finding ways, again, to balance that, that being safe with still living, because I think that this is going to be with us for a long, long time.
Well, it's going to be with us forever, right? But it's not going to be such a big present deal forever. But yeah, probably a while.
Well, depends what you consider a long time, right? So 5 minutes in a room sometimes can be a long time, but I think another 5 months at least is also a long time going into the spring. But we'll see how that goes. You know?
I mean, experientially, I'm not having a long year, and that's
it's been yeah.
I'm having a year that I mean, personally, there's really difficult stuff about it, and there's fever pitch suffering and difficulty, and more so the impending difficulty and division and potential spark points of conflict, which is what we're going to talk about.
Right.
Those are an element that makes 2020 so particular. But I gotta say, and I'm hearing this from a lot of individuals that are close to me in my life, and I'm very grateful for this. I'm not having a bad year. I'm not having a particular. I mean, there's the polarity is extreme, but there's a lot about the circumstance that is generating a lot of personal growth and opportunity, and I feel like I'm actualizing at an exponential rate, not just in spite of, but because of this.
Well, yeah, and I would say I would be less glowing about my year. I would say I've had a very challenging year, and COVID's a part of that. And it's like you said, because it's challenging, and I think because I've been open to the challenge, it has also been a year of tremendous growth. And in fact, so much growth that I've been experiencing growth that I wasn't sure was possible in my life, because I've been trying to figure it out for 30 years. Not ready to talk about it much yet, but huge things. And this is actually what we call in my biz, psychology, post-traumatic growth. I think there's this idea that trauma, whether it's long-term and collective, kind of like COVID, or it's going to be some of the things that we talk about later on, which is revolution or punishment or violence, that, well, these things can break us and they can wound us, that they can also break things loose in us and help us grow in ways that we would never expect.
Yeah, I have this term that I have coined. Well, it's a play on pliverage and plunder. And it's pliverage. I have had a pliveraged life in several ways, where there are these things that you don't want to have happen to you, and they're certainly not pleasant to experience. But because those things were a part of my life, and then because I was able to synergize them, well, effectively so. I feel like there's some things that I never thought I would be able to look at that as something other than just a terrible regret, a horrible thought, just a bad thing about my past. And now I look at those things as the things that made me and made me capable of some things that are bringing much happiness to myself. And I hope to be able to to share the privilege.
Yeah, and I actually find myself in a very similar place. So, and again, not going to get into this in this episode, but decades ago, I went through a series of events, one existential, one personal, that created dialectics, paradoxes, and you used a phrase with you, a Gordian knot. And these are things that I've been trying to tease apart for decades by entangling that knot by hand. And I found that the events of the last 6 months in particular kind of helped me cut through that knot that I've been trying so carefully to untangle. And that kind of brings us to in a different way to our theme today, which is
revolution versus evolution.
Which in that revolution is that kind of that violent upheaval where I guess evolution can be kind of dramatic too, but we generally think of it as being more organic, more growth in common parlance.
Yeah, I think ideally, even those of us who are, there's sort of a team burn it all down now. There's a team burn it all down, and there's a team, and then on the other extreme, there's a team, it's all right as it is. I don't think that there's many, actually, I don't think there's many who are like, it's perfect as it is.
No, I think that's pretty universal that most people are not copacetic right now. But I think there's actually two teams burn it down, and they want to burn it down for very different reasons and very different goals. And that's often what leads to revolution, is two sides feeling they're just enough to use violence in a very overwhelming way, thinking that each form of violence is going to lead to a better world. And I think that's going to be what we're talking about a little bit is when does punishment, when does violence, when does yelling, when does that lead to a better world? When does that actually create reform or change in an individual or group? And when does it just create more of the same? Where does it become a feedback loop that makes somebody more dangerous?
So as much as I would say that I am not definitively so, but decisively so, not on team burn it all down. There more and more as I would like to think I'm maturing,
right?
But as I experience more, as I age, I'm finding more and more things about society that are so not perfect, but they seem to be the result of, they are the effect of, they are they are us coming together to figure out how something works over time. And now in some of those institutions, there is runaway corruption, and it is so rotten to the core that I would say that there are some institutions, there's some institutions that were born out of perverse incentives. And
okay, so examples, so concrete for the audience.
Okay, well, of one that I don't think right now, and this is something that I was not just shy, but downright afraid of the social consequences. But I'll say it now: I do not think that policing and giving the monopoly on violence to the state is something that was born, and not universally in America. It could be said that it was born out of a perverse incentive, and that it had an origins in racism, in slavery. But I don't think that the state having the monopoly on violence is something that cannot be corrected. It is something that there is immense corruption, there is immense problems, it's severe, and to deny the severity of the problems, I would say is a little worse to my value system than to be like, hold on, we still, because I think that some people think that when they mean by upheaval of that is like this radical transformation. But I think it's important to say transform. That we're going to transform the way policing happens, as opposed to we're going to remove it, because I just don't see anywhere in the world where that experiment has been ran.
Right, and I think this is very important. So I think that I'm coming at this from, so if the dichotomy is this long, and you're here, I think I'm right here, right? In the sense that I agree with you from the flip side of the other middle, which is, given my job, whether it was as a martial arts instructor that worked with military police, many people who had been assaulted, many people who had been have been impacted by racism. So again, working with all people in my current job as a therapist, again, working with people who've been to war zones, who've been to revolutions, who've been to places that are corrupt on levels and cruel on levels that go beyond where our country is for the worst, in the worst areas.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that happens from this view that violence isn't the monopoly of the state, it's the violence is the monopoly of those with the most might or power who sometimes happen to be the head of a particular police station,
Yeah.
or a particular province. And if violence, so let's kind of define something for a moment. So violence being the monopoly of the state is the idea that before there was civilization, whoever had the biggest muscles and the biggest club and the most friends had the power. And in a sense, that's literal anarchy. And the flip side of that is if there's laws and rules and people are held accountable and there's only a few people who are allowed to be violent, that's better than everybody being violent.
Yeah, and we have such a particular problem in this country that I think a lot of my opinions about America, I try to think globally, universally, but we have a particular situation here. We've got more guns than people.
We do.
And as long as everyone has a gun, my father and my dog go blue, then that's a different problem than if that weren't the case. Because, you think of Australia or the UK, it's like very different situation with police because they don't need to have guns. I mean, there's some situations where
Right.
I mean, but an example of something that I would say I'm more on team change it so much that almost burn it down is prisons. Like I think that something I don't know. I feel like I'm being conservative by saying 80% of people who are in prisons right now don't need to be kidnapped and incarcerated by the state. Mm-hmm. They don't. That is, but then there are some crimes that I think that they certainly need to be put in a box for a while. Mm-hmm. And I would like there to be an element of treatment and not just punishment with that.
Right.
For most things.
So that's another dialectic that's on a different level. So on one level, we're talking about evolution versus revolution, and we're talking about this on a societal level, and we can kind of narrow down to the individual level, and there's a whole range there. And in this middle range, we have punishment versus treatment. So we have an entire society of people, again, many African American, many punished by a systematically unjust system of laws, who have been incarcerated, sometimes wrongly, sometimes because people have actually committed atrocities, regardless of their background. And then the question there is this coming out of a sense of justice? That is, they hurt somebody, so we get to hurt them. Is it a sense of if we hurt people that will change behavior because people don't want to be hurt? Or is it we take them out of society to protect other people? And then last one, do we take them out of society so that we can actually reform them and work with them to help them change their life and have new opportunities when they come out?
And that is so the fuck not what happens in most cases. And so with that, I'm not going to go too far on this tangent, but a big thing that keeps occurring to me with the situation currently of discrimination based on ethnicity, racism in America is the drug war. I see no larger factor. And then just mass incarceration in general. Mm-hmm. If we weren't punishing for people for drugs, and also if our police, if our armed and in numerous cases potentially and sometimes effectively deadly police force weren't bothering people for having things that obviously can be abused and harmful, and there's things like meth and heroin that I would say are largely problematic. But if sans the drug war, my God, that would be. I mean, so many of these videos are. I mean, the reason why the police officer, why the police interaction began was was drugs. I mean, there's so many. Oh man. So anyway, so that is like that to me is an example of that would be a big change. We see that as a huge change, but I think it's so plausible now. So with that, that's the thing that keeps me from Team Burn It All Down, because it's like, man, what if we fucked around and found out what would happen if we made some of these big changes? And I understand the frustration, because I understand why it seems like we got to burn it all down, because we haven't ran the experiment of there being many, or in the right positions, kind, intelligent, careful, uncorrupt, uncompromised people in positions of in our representative democracy. It's supposed to be a representative democracy, and they don't. So if those changes could be made, I think that we might look around and be like, whoa, I'm almost a conservative now. Or like, you know,
How do you mean?
In the sense of Brett Weinstein was saying this, and Heather Hine, he has a podcast, Dark Horse Podcast. Brett Weinstein and Heather Hine, they're a married couple, and they're evolutionary biologists, but they've been talking about sociopolitical stuff a lot lately. And they're saying, like, you know, we have the idea of liberal and conservative as an identity.
Right.
And it's like, so if you identify as a liberal, do you hold that identity so strongly that what if we got stuff working around here? Is there a way for you to look around and be like, all right, I want to keep this as it is. And so, like, this was the first time somebody had ever said this to my consciousness. It's like, I want to be a conservative one day. I want to one day be able to look around and be like, all right, this is good.
This is good enough. I'm good at this point.
But if you're on team change for the sake of change, then you're just kind of doing it in the same way that I think a lot of, you know, teenagers want to be rebellious. You know, it's like, so yeah.
So I think this kind of gets back to an ongoing theme with our podcast, is this concept of dialectics. And dialectics are not just going, okay, we have two opposing beliefs here, we have two opposing ideas, and we're going to stay here and be stuck. It's going, no, the challenge is when we do get stuck in one of those extremes, this is where things get more extreme overall. And I think that in many cases, this brings us back to the concept of a revolution, that my consistent experience with people who have been involved in systematic, localized violence, whether it's a family, a city, a country, a war, or a revolution, that the more people get hurt, the more that they want to hurt. And the more they want to hurt, more people want to hurt them. And this just exponentially tends to get worse. However, there are times without someone punching somebody else in the face, or trashing a police car, or standing up to a corrupt regime. At the same time, there's, again, I think so, instead of the 80-20 rule, this is like a 97-3 rule.
Yeah.
97% of the time, revolution and slow progress is better. 3% of the time, revolution or violence is better, but you better be damn well sure, because if you go a point or two over and you're in that 95 percentile instead of that 97 percentile, everything still goes wrong.
Yeah.
You can't be almost on those things.
And that's where I see a lot of my contemporaries. I think I don't want to be hawking fear, but there is such a thing as a necessary concern and a necessary fear. And I think that there is a future that I think many are plainly saying that we need to get to that point ASAP. And I don't think you want that. I really don't think you want that. And I think that a lot of us need to realize just how privileged. I mean, just how privileged are just plain privilege. Our experience,
or maybe North American privilege.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying,
or American privilege. The idea that we have not been, so many people in the United States of America and Canada, so let's go northern North America, have not been in situations of widespread systematic violence and corruption on a level where people around you are dying on a weekly basis.
Yeah. No, that's not. It's not like that is just localized to North America, but it's. Yeah.
Even Europe was torn apart by constant war just decades ago.
Yeah. I mean, the within the states. From sea to shining sea, the amber waves of grain were not affected by World War II,
Right.
like Europe was.
Now, we've had the Civil War, definitely. And again, this is an example of maybe revolution for a good reason.
Yeah.
And more people, Americans of
Yeah.
from all over, died than even in World War II, if I'm remembering those statistics
Well,
correctly.
right where we are right now, an example, Detroit and LA having had riots
Yes.
of intense riots and like city spread,
Right.
the whole city on fire. Like there is a culture here, and I tend to for good reason will not be ethno-specific about something unless I really feel like I should. But a lot of the elders, African American Black elders in Detroit, I have heard, I have in conversation and overheard, like people saying that, but there's this overtone you can see of like, we don't want another Detroit riot situation. I want my children to live in peace and whatever to avoid that. And I've heard several saying that we would like there to be more police, or for the police to be better outfitted to put down unrest if it's happening.
This has been my experience as well. Again, with the people that I work with, working in Detroit, that I work with, I probably currently work with actively about 4 people who live through, like, physically in the city, the Detroit riots, and then over the last 7 years, probably about 16 people.
Yeah.
Who've been through. I also work with a lot of single mothers, single fathers, and older individuals living alone in the city.
Yeah.
And to them, the idea of revolution is not nearly as exciting as it, or exciting is the wrong word, not nearly as
appealing,
even even if they are very strongly pro-change and very much want people to stand up for the rights of African Americans, that since they're living in the area that's going to be affected and they are themselves vulnerable, or they've been through it before, that there's definitely a very different level of concern. And I also work with people who very justifiably explain to me very understandably why that revolution feels like it does need to happen.
Yeah, and so I am very much for change, and I very much think that the need for that change to be as fast as possible and as thorough as possible, as lasting and thorough, is dire.
Yes.
However, from this is more from what I've taken in from others, mostly elders, and I've had relationships with people who began their life in a war-torn country, and it's like, you don't want that.
No.
You don't. And so I'm a very optimistic person, and I do not wish to be a voice of like, hey, be more concerned maybe than you are.
Right.
But I am convinced you don't want that unless we're sure that it'll work.
So
we're not.
And I think that also brings us back to that dialectic of when is it important and when is it useful. So again, for those who don't know, my background since I was 8 has been in martial arts, and I ran a martial arts studio for about 15 years. So I teach people how to figure out when to use violence. And I teach people weapons. I've taught people knives. I've taught people how to use objects around the house. So if somebody is trying to harm them or something that they care about or love, that if you need to, you could use the ultimate level of violence. And what I also would do by the time that they start getting to the higher ranks, which is like around brown belt, is I would sit down, and part of that training would be to ask them, can you live with the aftermath of those actions? And at the time, I thought it was important. And now that I do my current work, again, I'm working largely with people who are ex-military, and many of them ex-combat vets, that most people, when they imagine defending themselves against violence, and I would suggest that Kyle Rittenhouse is somebody who might fit this profile, 17-year-old kid who clearly was in a culture romanticizing the ability to use violence for likely what he felt was, and he was apparently very proud of his position, a just cause. And again, he's 17.
Yeah, I think he was convinced. I think he was convinced, and I want to give an opinion on that. I think there was a lot going wrong with him, and there was a lot of societal circumstances that I think that the blood is on our hands as a nation in a lot of ways. But I think the biggest, and I tend to be this way when there's something where there's a child who does something, who does something awful. Right. His parents are very. I really put the blame on them, because I do think that he, in that moment, thought that he was being heroic, and I think that and him having access to that weapon and being and not being taught like why it is only in the direst situation do you go vigilante.
Right.
I think that and when I initially saw the Kenosha story and him and that happening in particular, I was like, this is the problem with a lot of police officers, where there's an individual who is too psychopathic to have that job. You cannot have someone having that job who likes violence, who's excited for their next opportunity to hurt someone. And upon more looking into it, it's like, you know what? I think that he was definitely stupid and very, very wrong. But I do think that as he was driving to that scene, he was thinking, "This is my opportunity to be brave,"
Right. And I think,
but I just want to say this: he does need to go to prison.
Yes. Oh, very definitely. And here's the thing: there is a hypnosis, a seductiveness, a romanticism to just this concept of just violence. And I see a lot of people, when I was coming into the martial arts studio, come in with that. And this would be young kids, teenagers who saw Kung Fu movie. That was me. It's 13. I'm like, Kung Fu movie would be so badass if I could kick other people's asses. And there were people who had been in abusive households. And then there's this justice that no one's going to hurt me or anybody I love again. And then there's this again, that I had people who were they're the subject of racial violence. And they're like, I am going to stand up for myself and people that I love. And then there were actual bullies. I had people who came to me because they were getting in bar fights so bad that nothing was going to stop them except for they cared about their mom.
Yeah.
If they actually went to prison, it would break their mom's heart. But what happened in each of these cases is if this person stayed for more than 9 months, that romanticism of the romanticism of violence faded, because these people actually were being punched and they were causing injury to people who they respected and cared about. And it is impossible to do martial art. No, let me take that back. It's impossible to do martial arts in certain settings and not encounter that. If you're going into a competitive sport and you are kind of going, there are some like Cobra Kai dojos out there that do encourage the other, but most are going to give you an experience.
Okay, we might be having. All right, we're back. All right, is everything good? Everything good? I saw the mini loading wheel there. Having so wait, being impartial. I've lost the definition of this. Being partial is enjoying something. Being impartial is being neutral.
Objective. Yeah.
Okay, so being partial to violence, I think, is something that I see less in people who have, that mother that they don't want to break her heart, or that, that strong community. And I gotta say, I see a lot of the anarchist element tend to be people who have less to lose. In some cases, it's just somebody who's just being a fucking brat, to be honest. It's like you don't. I think that a lot of people, like, I would love them to be able to go in their like safe, enclosed like bubble, like the film Bubble Boy, and go to a war-torn country and be like, look around, like there is something to really appreciate about how relatively peaceful it is around here.
Right. And then in the same sense that sometimes there's also people who have been hurt so much that every day they're carrying around pain, anger, and fear, and it's hard for them to reach out and connect past that.
Yeah.
And so I think one thing I'd like to kind of talk about here, because is one thing I almost never hear talked about by psychologists. And it is one of the reasons why I work with the population I do, is that coming through the martial arts, I realized that people who began to, like, I think a lot of people, if they are getting caught up in the idea of being a hero, of standing up with violence or the possibility of violence against a wrong other, that a lot of times their story, their image, their simulation of that situation ends at the climax of the action. With them being the hero, with the villain smote, and there's cheers. And what I find is that people actually who get caught up in committing violence like that, it often is playing out, I used to be a victim and I'm not going to be anymore.
Oh yeah.
And so the one way to treat this that I've found is just like we did in the martial arts. If you end up hurting somebody that you respect because you need to, because that's the level you're going at for the rank that you're at in the martial arts, you get what you're causing to another person, and there's a connection there. Unfortunately, that tends to happen to people who romanticize violence usually about 5 minutes after they've committed it. Mm-hmm. And for some people, even if they're caught up in that rage and that anger and the fear, maybe 5 years. But it almost always comes back to them. And this is something that we call moral injury. And it goes alongside of PTSD. And this is why when I see friends of mine calling for evolution where I know their character, and I'm like, if you go out and you were to cause bodily harm to another person, and you were to follow that through, I know you. I know what the next 5 months, 5 years, 50 years of your life might be like. And it's probably not what you're imagining when you're being that hero and standing up for a just cause.
Yeah. So this is the definition of a dialectic here.
Yes.
That we want change. Mm-hmm. I'll just make this about myself. Like, I want change. I want it to be, you can almost use the word drastic. It's big. I want big transformation in the way that this society and, global society, the way this civilization is going. I'll keep this about the United States of America. I want big changes in the United States of America. They need to happen fast because the suffering and the danger is intense. Like, with police being like, there's going to be a number of police killings in the year 2020. I think that it is absolutely possible and necessary, and the need is very, very dire to make the changes that will make it so that I think it can be significantly less. I think that right now we are there's a certainty of that there's going to be this many thousand, this and next year until these massive changes are made. So the need is dire. But I observe that buildings on fire without humans in them isn't so much, my values aren't irked by that alone, but that then
leads also buildings on fire with people in them. Yeah. There's homes and there's small businesses. And again, here's the thing. I don't think there's any illusion that us talking right now is somehow going to change the violence that has existed in the world for tens of thousands of years.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is what we're saying, but I think what happens is that we have a trend over time towards civilization.
Yeah.
And if anybody questions that, I'm fundamentally, I have a wide range of ways that I try to understand the world, and I don't like to stick to one, but a big part of me since I was a kid has been science. And there is solid numbers, solid data. And if you haven't look up Steven Pinker, Is the World Getting Worse? Have you seen this?
Yeah, no, well, I'm aware of stinking Pinker, Steven Pinker, I'm very much I'm with his vibe. I like to have him. I like when he is pushed back against,
Right.
Because
He's one of those people who goes too far on the over intellectualized side.
yeah, you get too optimistic, and it sounds like you're not feeling in your heart enough the need for the change.
Exactly.
You know,
And-
but
and
it isn't.
I guess
I think it's so important for it to be recognized and constantly acknowledged that we are at the best place that we've been by a large margin.
So let's sum up kind of his research real quick. So basically what he's done, and he's looked both in the United States of America and all across the world, and he looks at major metrics. Death by like murder, pollution, assaults of all different types, wars, death by war, death by famine, poverty. And for the last 50 years, fairly consistently with blips up and down across the world, these statistics have been getting less and less violent, less and less unequal over time. However, this hides something, and this hides in the United States of America particularly a systematic racism and injustice that goes beyond numbers. And there's a human experience here, and that human experience is, yes, these numbers are getting better, but there's still more African Americans in jail than any other population by far, just outside not the proportional population of the different races or backgrounds, but just total. And that isn't covered in his numbers.
Yeah, and there's some factors that I don't think are acknowledged intensely enough because you can't put words to it that are intense enough of like what it is for an entire ethnic group to have been, for their origin story of getting to this place, to have been brought over forcibly, violently kidnapped, and then enslaved for this many hundred years, and then this many hundred years of like it's so that is such an intense both personal and I am beginning to observe more that there is something that could be called, I think the word people use is ancestral trauma, but trauma that exists on a DNA level that wasn't even things that your body had done to them,
right.
but that's so intense that it's like how much does that set a group back and an individual, and then so it's like we change the circumstances this much, but then it's like so that's really intense, and that's such a sad and a traumatic thing to talk about, that I understand, why we avoided taking the conversation to that depth,
right.
and more seeing it as,
right.
but so Coleman Hughes is someone that I really respect, and he has been looking into the specifics of the problem a lot, and he seems to observe more that it's like, well, right now the biggest discriminatory factor is your zip code, is your wealth status, but those, because of things like redlining and because of things like just how much of the setbacks and the cruelty, how deep it runs, it's like if you look at the statistics, that's an intense problem and needs to be addressed. And so that I'm so glad that we're addressing these things so fervently. However,
so you mentioned ancestral trauma, and I'd like to kind of pick up on that a little bit, because I think this is another topic that people don't talk about that much, or at least I haven't heard in the public conversation lately.
I hear it amongst spiritualists more than.
So I'm not saying ancestral in the sense that there's a spiritual, but I can actually take it and I'm going to describe that PTSD can be passed down in families, and so that when people grow up and they grow up as as slaves, and there's trauma there, and then there are children of slaves and Jim Crow and the Civil War, and then you're kind of going into poverty and ghettos and systematic racism, and there's violence and there's drug use and there's alcohol use because people need to distract themselves from the pain that they've been experiencing. That when you have parents who've been badly hurt, the cliche, I think this is also part of what we're talking about in terms of how these cycles of violence can continue, whether it's a just revolution or the pain that you're carrying down from parents who were hurt. That kids with parents with PTSD or what we call personality disorders, if you have trauma when you're young, develop those things themselves, and then they pass it down again and again and again. And when we wonder why the substance use is so much worse in areas of poverty and in those populations that have experienced atrocities, it's in part because of that literal, psychologically researched and valid, not just spiritual, generational trauma that passes it down systematically.
Yeah. So it's like on the societal level of treatment versus punishment, evolution versus revolution. Or let's just make it treatment versus punishment, because I think with evolution versus revolution, there's an interesting discussion there about, like, is revolution your word for fast evolution, fast and drastic evolution? So, as we're with treatment and punishment, that's not the same, right?
Yeah.
Because
I think the way that we're using it here, if we're going to the far extremes and we're talking about that dynamic range, I would get into the violent side of revolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So with treatment and punishment, I'm observing more and more that unless it's something like sexual assault or like just, intense cruelty and violence where somebody is the instigator and just some brutalizing someone, I don't see giving that person more pain, i.e. punishment, as being helpful in a lot of situations. If someone gets addicted to drugs, and sometimes the being addicted to drugs is the factor that led them to steal and led them to get in situations where they were violent, sometimes because they were defending themselves. I don't think hurting that person anymore is good.
So, and this is the thing. Again, I in my job, I feel very blessed. Because I get to experience worlds in other human beings that most people will never get to experience because they tend to limit themselves to their friends group.
Yeah.
And I talk. Some of my clients are police officers. Some of my clients are felons. Some of those were justly incarcerated for what they understand are horrible things that they've done. Others are the things that we've talked about. They're a matter of systematic policies that the way to make money, the way to get by with selling drugs, they got caught with drugs or they were framed with it, and then they get a felony. And each of these people that I work, most of the people that I work with, and I would say again, 99% of the people that I work with, that these people are rich, dynamic human beings who, if they come to me, if they've been able to get it to me, they really want to change. They want there to be something different in their life, and they're not defined by what they've done.
Yeah.
And I think, so that idea that punishment makes you better, a lot of times it's left them emotionally crippled, left them with more trauma, left them with more pain. And sometimes they come to me when they're so tired, they can't do anything else but work on themselves. And in other times, I think that punishment in this setting caused them to find religion, caused them to find, I've worked with a couple of people who became drug counselors while in prison. And these people actually did, because of their harsh environment, find a better opportunity. So the question is, how do we get more of that second and less of the first?
Yeah. I think that the factor for me, I just gave some examples of, like, and it's not just because of how heinous the crime of, like, sexual assault is that we have to hurt them. They have to experience pain. And just like when you're training a dog, it has to be like, it's helpful if it's as immediate and it's very, very clear to the consciousness that's like, this is happening to you because of what you did. This nightmare that is befalling you, which is this amount of time in prison or whatever. This is because of that. And now you're hurting, and it's because of that. Then it can be perhaps even helpful in their potential, redemption and treatment. But when we're talking about a society now, and it's like, it's almost like the need for revolution, the way some folks talk about it, is like, this society has done so bad. Uncle Sam and the all-seeing eye have sinned so hard that we got to hurt it. We got to punish it for what it's done. And when you punish a society, a society is made up of people, and
you're part of that society. There's an interconnectedness.
And children who have just recently arrived as consciousnesses. They just started, and we're going to put more unnecessary suffering on their lives with this idea that that it's necessary. These changes must happen, and I definitely and now so back. I will now get off of my I've been coming from the position of that's the thing about when you're someone who values and sees the practicality, the pragmatics of dialectic versus debate versus argument. I end up seeming like I'm extremely against burning it all down, when really it's just I'm seeing so much extremity from my peers on that way, where it's like I gotta be like, hey, can I push up against this a bit?
And this is something that I've kind of found in my entire life. And I think if you've been listening to us, I think instead of us having two opposing views and debating each other, we're debating ourselves together.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what dialectics are here. Because again, I think we're both saying that violence is necessary, punishment is necessary, but when does it do good?
Well, I would like to say violence can be necessary in extreme situations.
So in that sense, to me, it is. So again, until lions become vegan healthily, so we can genetically engineer all carnivores to eat a renewable source, that there is going to be violence in this world. And even if we're growing crops, there's violence that comes from those crops, that it is inescapable. I mean, you can become a Jainist. Jainists are a religion that believes that you need to avoid harm to even microbes and all living things. To be that extreme is to be really connected empathetically to the pain of all living beings.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me. I used to register more on the spectrum of like I refuse to harm insects versus like kill them all, die. Like I thought I was that, and I listened to music that was saying that. I wrote some music that was saying that as a teenager and early 20-something. But I find more that it's like I was getting more towards the middle at some point. But now it's like, well, the effort is let's be as peaceful as possible whilst keeping in mind that in some circumstances, it ain't a possibility.
Right. So there's a term that I've been thinking about a lot in relation to our talks, because one of the things I've been trying to do is to get better to talk to people who haven't worked with dialectics, to talk about dialectics. And there's a term that I kind of found from my friends who are sound engineers, and lighting engineers, and that is, or videography, and that is dynamic range. This idea that you want the ability to cover all ranges of sound, even if the sounds in the most extreme are distracting or annoying in most cases. If you don't have that ability to cover the full dynamic range, you don't have real flexibility, and you don't have real choice.
Yeah. Speaking of dynamic range, let's
move that over there. Okay.
If it's pointing at your face. All right.
So to that end, a big part of, I think, what we're getting at here is that I absolutely believe as a martial arts instructor, and I actually absolutely believe as someone with a CPL, that it is our response.
What's that, CPL?
I'm sorry, concealed pistol license.
Okay.
That it's absolutely like an imperative skill to have, and to be able to understand violence, so that if something that you believe in so much that you would give your life for that, or risk somebody else's life for that to protect, and whether that's your own life, the life of your child, your dog, like these are things that are unique to each person. I guess this is one of the thoughts that I started but didn't finish. I always ask people, what is it, once I ask a student to go through and imagining using the most extreme techniques they have, and go, what is your limit in your personality? Mm-hmm. What can your soul, what can your morality, what can your personality handle? And then the next question is, what would be worth it?
Yeah.
Is it your wallet that's worth it? Is it your pride that's worth it? Is it your sports team?
Yeah.
Is it your mom? Is it yourself? And for some people, it's their mom, but not themselves.
Yeah.
And I think if somebody understands violence, but they don't understand that part of themselves, they're dangerous to their own soul.
Or is it your children? Is it the children of tomorrow?
Yes.
Even if it means sacrificing yourself. And that, so I'm gonna bring up the example of something that I have heard a lot, and I would say overwhelmingly so in my small case study of just the reads that I've gotten.
You talk to a few people.
Yeah. Well, particularly I'm saying like elder Black people in America who are raising children, who have already raised children, and now, and some of which have grandchildren. There is this thing that I wish to put into the consciousnesses of those that are on Team Burn It All Down. That
don't have a chance to have those conversations.
Well, it just seems to me from what they're espousing that they don't have this in their heart as intensely as some of us do, which is that I have listened so much to it specifically articulated or just embodied through the way someone is living of those that it's just like, I want my children to live in peace. I suffered this much.
Yes.
And then my parents and grandparents suffered this much, and now we're here, and it's bad, and we need things to change. But God damn it, I want my children to live in peace.
Yes.
So that's a part of the dialectic to have with you, to push back against the part of you that is like, it's so bad that we need to fucking burn it down. We need a revolution tomorrow. It's like, hold on, please consider, or just know that when people say things like, if you're not with us, you're with the police. Right. It's like, no, there are some who their value system and just where their life is right now, it is so intensely in their heart that I don't want riots because I want my house to not be on fire.
So I want to also cover the other flip side of that, which is, I mean, we've been talking about revolution from the right. There's a lot of talk of revolution, or on the left, there's a lot of talk of revolution on the right too.
And there will be, and I think that we need to prepare for this. If Joe Biden wins the presidency over Donald Trump in November,
I think
there will be a lot more talk of revolution from right-wing, conservative America.
And I think there is, and I think that, again, we have the red state, blue state bubble through social media, because I've purposely kept a lot of my more right-leaning friends on, and I very much seek out the right-leaning boards. And I used to be more right-leaning. I mean, I used to be more libertarian and individual rights and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So I kind of understand some forms of that thought, but I guess my point here is we're not just talking to the left about the dangers of revolution. I'm talking to anybody who's more libertarian on the right. And the idea here is, I find that almost everybody cares about a certain group of vulnerable populations. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times for the right, it's family, it's their kids, and it's their grandparents, and wanting that safe, calm, quiet society that feels stable and predictable and wholesome. That is as risked by revolution as, again, the most vulnerable populations that are most valued by the left. And this is LGBT community. This is single mothers. This is women generally. This is vulnerable children. That when you have mass violence on any level, it is always the most vulnerable to get hurt on both sides.
So it's like, that is why I want to value, and I want my public voice to make the effort to include why it would be so much better if we could do this relatively peacefully. Mm-hmm. And perhaps even, and now this is an intense sacrifice, given how much unnecessary suffering will happen if these changes do not come swiftly and thoroughly.
Right.
If we're not sure that on the other side of that fiery revolution will be this utopia that we wish for, or just a lot better circumstances for millions of us, then maybe it's better that it take 5 or 10 years, and it happen. As Bernie said, we're going to have a political revolution. that how much more ideal that would be, because of just how much havoc and death and suffering will happen quickly and violently if we try to do it too fast. Now, this makes me sound like more conservative than several of my friends are willing to tolerate.
No, I get it. And that's the challenge. This is why we're doing this. People argue that the middle is milquetoast and the middle isn't decisive. I say that this ability to hold a dynamic range is the harder position to hold.
Yeah.
Because the people who you love are going to say, you're with us, you're against us. And if you're in that dynamic range and you're evaluating this from a systems perspective, a 50,000 foot perspective, as well as a human perspective, that I've lost friends because of this, or I felt more distant from friends because of this, and that is me being courageous, because I love those fuckers. Yeah, I respect those fuckers.
Yeah, and a lot of those who are decisively on team I want my children to live in peace, even though they are aware of how much how much of a need there is and how dire the need for change is. A lot of them either don't have Instagram accounts or are not in the feed, are not on these threats where their children. And I got to say, in some cases, I avoid judgment and name calling, but I'm going to say some of y'all be talking like straight the fuck up children with this. If you're not with us, you're against us. Shit. So I got a little angry there. And sorry, not sorry, but so that was a bit of scorn, which could be called punishment. I'm verbally punishing you.
Again,
but on the treatment side,
but it's
please,
I love you. It's like,
yeah,
I love you.
I love us. I love us.
And this is stupid. Like,
so
there's a difference between calling out character and calling out behavior.
Yeah, I'm not calling out people's character. I know. I really think that it comes from in a lot of it comes from
places.
From a place of genuine concern,
justice and concern and empathy for a group of people on either side that you feel is vulnerable and threatened.
Yeah, that have been.
If you feel it's grandmother, if you feel it's your kids, that's justified. And if you feel like it's your communities that have been marginalized, that's justified.
Yeah.
But what is the next step? What happens after the climax? What happens after that gun's fired? What happens 5 minutes later, 15 minutes later, 5 days later, in yourself and in the world around you? And
that's what I say is an observation about the future. We call that an opinion, right? And so my prediction is that the more
Zach the prophet,
the more it looks like a violent revolution, it's going to get way. The very things that we're angry about, that we need to change, are going to clamping down. At least for a while. Like the result of that will be the opposite of defunding the police. They will have a better argument for more funding and more tanks.
Yes.
More tanks, more tear gas, more readiness to get the green check mark from what I think is a majority of people.
In fact, I would say that there are certain actors. So again, as part of the time here, we're talking about people who actually want the world to be better. And I think we have to own that there's people on both sides who don't want the world to be better,
or haven't thought about it to the point.
No,
where
I think there's a certain group of people who want this to become divisive, so that the military
or there's something in them that
So I get it.
The Joker archetype.
There's actual true psychopaths though.
Yes.
Sociopaths. So I think there's a biological group of human beings who do not have a conscience in the way that others have.
So there's psychopaths, and then there's psychopathy in someone who may be able to be treated, right?
So the way I kind of break this down, if you look at the research, that there are certain people who are biologically, there's several things that happen. One, they're really rewarded by reward. So if like I get a little sugar, or I get some money, or if somebody does cocaine, that for that psychopath, they're going to be more rewarded than the average person. But they don't notice punishment, pain, embarrassment. Well, sometimes embarrassment, but pain and like social pain, it doesn't hurt them the way that it hurts other people. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of times there isn't an emotional conscience. But with very smart psychopaths, they can imagine what it's like for another person to feel things, which is how they can be manipulative.
Yeah.
But
the example of Kyle Rittenhouse, and I think that and something that I want to warn against is that there's what he did, which was drive to that place with it, I think, in his head, and maybe a percentage in his heart, because I also do think that when someone goes to somewhere where there's violence happening with a gun, a part of them wants to fucking shoot someone.
Oh yeah,
But
I also think that a big part of what's going on here is there's a difference between somebody who's caught up in an idealized narrative that frames them as the hero, and somebody who's a psychopath.
Yeah, and there's psychopathic cops. There is a police killing video that is so fucking awful and traumatic. I mean, they all are. But it is one that you know, there's, I mean, to list this, it's terrible to even have that as something to weigh the trauma of a video of a police officer who's supposed to be protecting people murdering somebody. But there's this one Daniel Schaefer, and I warn, I caution, don't watch it if that's something, if seeing something like that has the potential to break you. Some of us have worked on a disposition. Where it's called anti-fragile, you know, so there's a fragile systems, a glass that shatters, and then there's a robust system, stone or iron that, you know, you hurt it and it doesn't dent, it doesn't change, and then there's anti-fragile of like, and I feel like I have achieved that. I worked on it for a while. When I see horrible things in the world, it hurts me, it's upsetting, and then at some point I pick up the pieces and I'm like, all right, I need to be a better person. So, but I wanted to say about that video, that is an example of a police officer who is a fucking psychopath, putting someone on his knees, having him play Twister, and then fucking executing him. And the whole time, it's clear that it's like, I'm gonna kill this person, and I want to because I like to kill. And he had "you're fucked" etched on his gun.
So yeah, there are, and this is what I'm talking about, and this is also, again, why anarchy is problematic. This is why revolution without a governmental structure is problematic, because, again, the other side of a police state is not a peaceful utopia. It's several sets of armed militias with very different goals. And that's a dangerous thing. That's a very dangerous thing, because it's psychopaths and sociopaths. Sociopaths are people who've learned to devalue their feelings and their empathy, whereas psychopaths, the way I define it, and there's a debate among psychologists, biologically are incapable.
Yeah.
Even though they might not be malicious people.
Yeah, they might even be like neutral. They're neutral about whether or not they want violence and mayhem, whereas or they can be. Right. As where a psychopath is definitively wants pain for the sake of pain.
No,
right?
so even a biological psychopath is not necessarily malicious.
Oh.
Because if you, this is a great thing to look at. I'm horrible with names, but look up scientific researcher who was a psychopath. And there's a guy who was a neurologist, and he was testing himself, and he realized after a series of tests and brain scans that, wait a minute, I am matching all of the check marks for a psychopath. But what he did is he's a systems thinker. He realized that malicious actions against others ultimately harmed his ability to be rewarded.
Yeah.
So this is one of the best ways when I've worked with people. The clinical term for this is antisocial PD. Different from other people when they have an idea of violence, giving them their power back or being heroic. And I walk them through to the end of the video so that they can actually experience their consciousness in their head. With an actual psychopath, you just have to give them a bigger picture where they realize the more that they harm others, the more likely that they are to be harmed.
Yeah.
If you can give them a vision of interconnectedness and they're clever enough to get it, they often they'll moderate their behavior to be less destructive.
Chris Orozco said something that I've been thinking and feeling about it since on the Nonsensus podcast. Christopher Orozco, Chris Orozco. I don't even know if he likes being called Christopher, but I do sometimes because I call people by their full name reflexively because I like to be called Zachary. Anyway, Chris Orozco, shadow integration aficionado. Coach, very, very helpful, very, very smart, very, very kind man who I love much and have a podcast with weekly. He said we were talking about it was just after Kenosha had happened, and he said, I don't think that it's going to be empathy as a society that brings us to the point where we're like, okay, we need to de-escalate, because this was his opinion. Because if his observation, because if it were empathy and the kindness within us that would bring us to that point, we would have already done it, right?
Maybe.
But we may need to get to the point where it's so obvious that it's just the pragmatic choice. It's just practical because it's like, do you want your house on fire? You know, do you want you and those you love to be in serious, severe physical danger constantly
to get the rabid squirrels out of the attic?
Yeah. And so oh, I would like so much for it to be the goodness of humanity that makes us do the right things.
But it's understanding that interconnectedness. Like if part of our country burns, our whole country burns. And if you're not, and if you're in a rural area, if you think that somehow you're going to come out on the other side well, even if it's financially, even if it's like, again, your grandmother having nightmares, like we're going to come out of that worse.
Yeah.
Right.
And just so I don't think that we have societal sociopathy so much as we do have some societal psychopathy going on.
Well, I think, and again, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I think this is maybe helps explain Chris Roko's kind of the idea a little bit.
Orozco.
Orozco. I'm so bad with names. Orozco. Yeah, I tried to learn Mandarin in its phonetic language. I'll never get that right. So it's this idea of in-group empathy without out-group empathy.
Yeah.
In-group empathy without out-group empathy is what allows us to go, I love these people are hurt, so I'm going to destroy these people over here.
Yeah.
Because those aren't people, they're they're bad things.
Without this sense of, and I think that this is me being an optimist. This is me having in my heart and head more, the Anne Frank quote. It's just to have like the experience of like what befell her and her family. And for her to have written in her diary, I still think humans are inherently good. Like I've got that going on in me. That's that I need to push back against what sometimes sometimes I am optimistic to a fault about the goodness in humanity. But I will say now I have been driven from what I observed to the place that I do think that hopefully, best case scenario, it already is the cataclysm that we've already experienced. But to put it kind of doom and gloom about the future, but optimistic and that we could get to better places afterward. I think that it will be negative stimuli. It will be catastrophe that will bring us to that place. I think it will effectively bring us to the place where there is a more mass societal felt understanding of we're all here.
Right. And I think to that end, since we've already been so light in this podcast, I kind of want to come back to the idea that we're saying this for our community, for anybody who's listening, under no illusions that somehow because we feel this way and we're working to do our work in the world with other human beings, we're not just talking. I know we both live this in our own way in our lives, that just like not being violent yourself won't stop someone from being violent towards you. Us saying, hey, we need to like hold revolution off to like the very last resort doesn't mean that someone decides, no, I think 17 resorts left, it's time for violence. I really do think that Biden, Trump, or uncontested, there is a good chance of revolution on some level this fall.
Either way that goes.
Yes.
Oh yeah. In fact, there is an argument that I could present that we're heading for, I don't want to say rougher waters, but it may be a rockier road with Biden, but still my. Well,
I think it's rocky either way.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a good chance that there is violence and burning cities, burning cars, either way.
Yeah, and I will say for those of you who are like, deleting Zachary, no longer talking to that guy. Biden is still to my value system the lesser evil, and I will be voting against Trump. I will be voting against Trump. I will be voting against Trump. Yeah, and I don't think that that's going to change. I think that my value system it's so clear that Biden is this, at least politically and as a person, is this significantly lesser evil to me and my value systems as I observe it. However, it's a rocky road right now.
It is.
It's a rocky road either way, but it's like again, it's my value system. It's how much having Trump as head of state and seeing his face so often and having the unavoidable thought of his existence and his having risen to power and currently being in power, how much that is psychologically, emotionally hurting those that I love and so many that I observe peripherally and the policies and but yeah, just both geopolitically and with what's going to happen, what could happen with civil unrest here, we're in a rough spot. We're in a rough spot.
So I think this brings us to, so if we're not going to change the world, what are we doing here? And to me, a big part of what we're doing, at least in this episode, and I think, I want my friends to do and live well.
Yeah.
The people who I care about, I want them to do and live well. So when I see people who are espousing violence, who at some point will have to look back at themselves when violence does happen and go, I encourage that. And to ask, how are you going to carry that in yourself? Because if it is, for some people, that choice is justified. It does fit their personality. And there are people who make those choices who I can respect in making those choices.
Yeah.
And there are people who are making those choices who it does not fit their values, who it does not fit their soul and their core personality. And when this happens, or when they are part of that violence, that it is going to haunt them for a very significant part of their life in a very significant way. But on the flip side, because I've already kind of alluded to that, on the flip side, the other time people get really hurt by trauma is when they believe they live in a world where it can't happen to them.
Yeah.
And this is why I think it's important to bring up that this fall, even we're having such a light and fun conversation here, that this fall, that there is a very real chance that other people are going to decide on revolution for us, and that there is going to be violence.
Oh.
And then the question becomes, how do we, with this dynamic range, guided by what's important to us and our values, guided by the communities that are valuable to us and being effective, how do we navigate that?
Yeah, I was sitting with the fear of that so intensely the other night, and standing and pacing. I was feeling so much of that concern, and that, like, whoa, we are 2 trains on a track right now, and we know when it collides. I watched the documentary on Netflix, The Great Hack, which I won't go into that so much, but I do. That is one that I suggest putting that into your consciousness. It helps you have at the very least, it could help you have a more of a intellectual self-defense against what is happening to you when you look at the Facebook feed and Instagram. When you're on social networks and you're being bombarded with mostly like the infographics,
right.
The memes, where some of those are flat out generated by bad actors who want to divide America.
Right.
Some of them, and a lot of them are, and then when you have those out there that are intentionally divisive and the purpose of them is to, let's make these people hate each other so much where violence is inevitable. Like, so you get those out there, and then the whole culture, the whole conversation devolves more into conflict. So anyway, I wanted to end by
real quick, do you mind if I?
Yeah.
So with this idea, so again, one thing I want to kind of think about, we might be fine this fall. We might be fine. There might be some things happen. There's some discord. I think that's going to happen to some degree.
Hopefully, just isolated spark points, I think, are inevitable.
But if it's not isolated, if it's moderate, the question, what's going to happen is people from extremes and people who you love and you care about, we've already seen that. We've already seen that a lot of our friends on the right, the middle, the left, the libertarian, the sideways, that there's very strong opinions about what's good and what's right and what's okay to be part of the group. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very important to before we enter into this possibility, ask, what are your internal values? When do you take your family away? When do you choose to go into a situation where there could be violence?
Yeah.
When do you defend yourself? To what level do you defend yourself? And how well do you prepare? And how do you still manage to care, to love, to enjoy life? Because life doesn't stop when there's a war or a famine or a depression. That we still have to live, and live means that dynamic range of a full life. So how do you balance all of these realities? The pain of the people who you care about, that you're fighting for, but also your own life and your own vitality and your own well-being.
Yeah.
How do you balance those things with that dynamic range?
Yeah, the biggest factor that keeps me away from I won't call it this time team burn it all down, as more of like on the spectrum of burn it all down versus like, hey, we can change things around here. It's going to be hard, and it might take time, and that is tragic that it might take time. But this is such a nightmarish reality that I'm doing everything I can to avoid this. What keeps me what keeps me away from extremity of like we need a violent revolution soon, what keeps me away from that, the biggest factor is I don't know if that violent revolution is going to be helpful. Right. Not only am I not sure, I don't think so.
No, I would agree.
So so with that, it's like, do we punish this society? Do we punish ourselves? Or do we really make sure that our hearts and our intellects and our behaviors are rooted in treatment, in making things better around here? So I wanted to present a framework that has already helped me so much, and this is a framework for how to engage, particularly with socio-political issues that are divisive.
And I checked this out a week ago, and I really, really like this approach.
Yeah. So you know, having a constitution can seem like it can stop you from doing what I think the human experience is supposed to be, with there always being wiggle room. You know, I might find myself in a situation tomorrow where my constitution doesn't apply, but I like this a lot. I think it's very effective. Theory of enchantment.
So I'm sorry, I was going to ask what it is, and you already said it. Yeah. So what is it again?
Theory of enchantment. It is Chloe Valderi. It is a it's a course that she offers, but taking in just the spark points of this, just putting the 3 principles into your consciousness as soon as possible, and please, I suggest try to apply this. Like, just try it out, see if it works. But taking a deeper dive is helpful.
So what's number 1?
Number 1 is always see human beings as human beings, never political abstractions.
Okay. So kind of looking again behind that romanticism of being a hero against villains, that's a political abstraction. Like, and it's a narrative abstraction, and the political abstraction is things like race, gender, politics.
I mean, it could be argued that bad person, good person, or bad people, good people is a political abstraction.
Yeah. So political or narrative abstractions.
Yeah. But what definitely is it's the thing, you know, like something that's tempting for me to break that rule is if I see a police officer, it's a little easier for me to be like, okay, this is a human being who has a fucking shitty job. And a job that in most departments is rife with corruption. You know, there's examples like Camden, New Jersey. I don't have time to summarize that story, but you know, we've got problems, intense problems with police and policing in this country. But when I am faced with one person in that uniform, it's like I have an easier time of being like, okay, I have to approach this person as a person in a position. But when there's a line of them and they're dressed like fucking stormtroopers and they're fucking firing volatile chemicals into crowds of people, it's fucking real difficult to be like, whoa, hold on. This is a group of people. This crowd of people is a group of people. This is a crowd of people. I had a bird's eye view moment at Standing Rock, North Dakota, where I was able to not dissociate. I felt actually quite the opposite. I felt most associated that I've ever felt looking at a group of people where there's 2 sides that are fighting each other. The police are firing projectiles and water cannons in the freezing winter of North Dakota. Oh my God! Into this group of people, and for a moment, I was able to feel and observe it as that's a group of people. There's a crowd of people. You know. There's like, it's very, very clear that they've divided themselves into sides, and these sides are trying to harm this side, and this side is absorbing that violence mostly, overwhelmingly there. But now when I see moments of police standoff, I see a crowd of people that are having a problem. you know, and that's difficult. I just want to say that it is difficult to do that. So number two, the principles of theory of enchantment is, if you're going to criticize to build up, criticize to help change someone, or to push back against an ideology for positive changes. Criticize to build up, never to destroy, never to break down.
And I think that's great, because it's that behavior, not character. It's understanding that there's behavior that is destructive, that is bad, that is wrong, that is causing problems. It is rarely that human being.
Yeah.
There are those very like 1% exceptions, but it's rarely that human being. I think another thing that kind of comes in is try to do it privately first. And if you don't feel confident doing it on your own, do it with one or two neutral parties or friends of both of you, because public shame and public criticism, we can probably do a whole a whole episode on this, often has the opposite effect. But when you approach somebody one-on-one, respectfully, even if they're mad at you or they don't hear it then, they're more likely to sit on that and think than if they have to defend themselves publicly. Because the more a person hears themselves talk for one side, the more they believe it about themselves. This is a psychological truth.
Yeah.
So if I go, I'm not that sort of person, and I hear myself say that, you're the one who's wrong, the more that I believe it. So if someone was to come to me, and what I go to other people privately, and I go, hey, and you come with a compassionate truth, or you come with an empathetic truth, or at least a hopeful truth, this gives that other person an opportunity to actually hear what's being said.
Yeah, or I would say both. No, always and.
Yes.
Because it's not an either or. You come with your embodied values.
Oh yeah.
And then they observe. I used to.
So define that. So what do you mean by embodied? Because I agree 100%.
Well,
but
I have this example of how what really helped me to learn. Criticize to build up, and to transform, not to destroy, not out of hatred. Which was I used to hate conservatism and hate conservatives, and I had a few experiences, examples, embodied through humans, but one in particular where there was someone who was severely right wing and always armed to the teeth, and also pretty goddamn racist, who was a member of my family, who I noticed more and more that as long as we didn't go into those conversations, he was all right to me. He didn't embody evil, but when you got him talking about certain subjects, he didn't. There was groups of people that he didn't see as people. So
some people call that compartmentalization. I think it's more informative to call it the hypnosis of narration.
Yeah. That
we get a narrative or a story in our mind about what's good and bad, and we lose contact with the world and our humanity at those times.
So I noticed though with him, he didn't hate me,
right?
And I held a lot of political positions that he fucking hated, but we spent so much time together at family dinners and things where I started noticing that he had to deal with the reality that this person that he grew to respect, and he said to me, like, Zach, I respect you, like, fucking hate liberalism, but I respect you.
Yeah.
And at that time I behaved and espoused. I was definitively liberal at that time. I don't know if I were to weigh myself today, I would say I've definitely I have fallen into the thing of where you get more. Not
again. We're talking about dynamic range. I think so. Again, I think we're coming back to again and again. I own a CPL with the 0.0001% chance that I'll find a moment important enough where that needs to be there, and because of that, I am prepared for it. Yeah. But my plan is to never ever need to pull that gun.
My plan is to avoid the violence as much as possible.
And on the flip side, I am a caring, kind, empathetic person most of the time. But there's times there's been times where I've been so empathetic or so caring, that I've allowed myself to be hurt or not stood up for something. And
There was a bully. Sometimes there's a fucking strong bully that
Right.
needs to that does that. You know, the ideal outcome is not to bully them back and to give them more of the pain that they're used to, that psychologically they're calling out for by being a jerk. But sometimes you got to quell a situation.
right. And then that most of the time, it's that balanced place in the middle where you're really being yourself and you're really being free and you're really being human with other humans.
Yeah.
And to me, again, the middle is not a default. It is where life happens, and the extremes are for just that.
Yeah.
The extremes.
And so with liberal conservatives, back to the criticize to build up, to positively transform, never to destroy, I see people having their minds changed, and sometimes even having their values and their positions politically nudged just a little, just by them having the experience of, I am now in the presence of a conservative who is not being a dick, or not being a dick to me. And now with this era of Trump and Trumpism, it has been really difficult not to observe that those who, particularly now, if you're, you know, there's a little bit more of a rationale for voting for Trump in 2016 because his opponent was Hillary Clinton. But now, after seeing how this presidency has been,
And we're back.
yeah, we're back. Okay, and so with that, it is hard for me to observe somebody who is, especially if they're significantly pro-Trump in 2020, not to be, according to my value system, like kind of a bad person, you know, or a bigot, right? Because at the very least, you're okay with those elements existing so clearly in him.
And
but I've noticed,
I think because I want to come to that another time, because I think it's important to talk about that narrative hypnosis and that story that we so often, that I think you probably don't encounter as much as I get to encounter, because I sit down with people with those narratives and we can talk. I think we're near the end of the podcast this time, but I want to come back to that another time.
And I have come to intellectualize American conservatism and conservative values exponentially more. I have gained an understanding and even sometimes a downright appreciation for certain tenets and values over the last 4 years than I had all years prior, because I had to reconcile. The not just the existence of conservative America, but that there are so many of my neighbors who having those conservative, you know, Republican policies pushed forward by this person who appears so villainous to me, that was so important to them that they were all right with him being how he is.
All those other things.
So,
but on a positive note, positive note. Before we go there, I am really, since Newt Gingrich back in the 90s when Clinton was in office, the Republicans have been a block, a wall. And I think what we've been seeing the last few weeks of dozens of Republican governors and ex-presidents and officials coming out against Trump I have never seen this. I haven't seen this happen in the Republican Party in 20, 30 years, where you have this much going against the line.
And it's because, for me, it's the most overwhelming observation. I could remove policy from it. To me, I observe him to be a bad person.
Yes, and I think it's one of those rare exceptions where we can say it's not behavior, it's character.
Yeah. And so the third. Okay, so I just wanted to just drive it home with that, though.
Yep, third.
But also to drive home that even with the people who are still pro Trump now, some of my mother's friends, if you just don't go into the political conversation you might observe this person to be somebody who is kind and cares about people.
Yes.
But as soon as you get them talking politically, it's like, oh, fuck, here we go. And so
there are ways to bridge that. I
Yeah.
know people say there aren't, and they've had difficulty doing it. But again, I think this understanding of dialectics is one of the ways to help find that bridge.
Yeah, and if you just embody what could be called embodying your truth, sorry,
Around
I said
them,
that
close to
in a
them.
mimicking way. Yeah, if they get to observe you embodying your truth, and effectively to them, they register you as a left-leaning liberal who isn't a bastard.
Yes.
Then they do some rewiring. It happens.
Exactly,
It happens
yes.
auto-magically.
And again, this is with the studies that show how do you actually change racism. It isn't through shame. It isn't through guilt. It isn't through people falling with a lockstep ideology. It's where you get people from different backgrounds, different races, different religions, and you get them working in close proximity towards a common goal.
Yeah.
Where they have to be embodied with each other and they have to interact with each other. This is where those narratives, those false narratives, start to fall away.
In the movie American History X, we see that with the folding of the laundry scene. And Daryl Davis, he's a jazz musician, also a black man in America, who has effectively through organically befriending members of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes.
He's
Another good example.
been the arbiter of their transformation into not only no longer part of a hate group, but probably out there doing the real work of anti-racism.
And talk about courage and talk about having like that right to pain and that right for anger and that righteous justice against the people who he's talking to.
Yeah.
And to go in there, because he kind of just glows.
I love him so much.
Like, yeah. And that is a courage that we don't have enough stories about in this, in our society.
God,
that
I
sort
want
of
him to be
courage.
so famous. Daryl Davis, everybody. There's a episode of him on the Joe Rogan podcast, which is a really deep dive, and then there's also shorter 10, 15-minute videos that explain, give the spark notes of who he is and his story and what he has already done in the world, and I think it's really beautiful. So
we have third point?
The third principle of theory of enchantment is root everything that you do in love and compassion. And so that is so difficult.
So one thing I do to my patients being veterans, words like love and compassion are not often things you can start with.
Yeah, how about just support?
Respect.
Acceptance, support.
Acceptance and respect.
Yeah.
They're more neutral and respect. Kind of times I've felt a lot more by that more masculine psychology.
Oh, yeah.
And I think this is a start, this idea of mutual respect. Same thing in martial arts. Like, with that part, you don't always love or care about or have empathy for the person you're sparring against. But there's this deeper, warmer meaning to respect in martial arts than I find in some other settings when it's done well. And I think that has a similar effect on people.
Yeah, sometimes the hug after somebody gets their face bludgeoned in or
Yes.
choked out till they tap out in a mixed martial arts fight is some of the most, like, you can just you feel the respect.
Someone you've never had words with, you get to know better than people that you've talked to for years in those situations.
Yeah, and yeah, so we could do a 12-hour podcast of just what is the definition of love, and maybe not get to it. I feel like
we're having another big topic next week. Maybe we do love down the road. I'm really excited about next week's topic.
Yeah.
So it's almost as controversial, if not more so, in some circles than today's.
Which is
money.
I mean, I would say that it's more. A lot of the circles that we run in, the art community, or excuse me, the art communities. It always weirds me out when people have
creative
such
communities.
Yeah, that's such a well. When people say the something community, and it's and that is millions of people who are so not homogenous, and it's like like hold on,
especially the creative communities.
Yeah. So the creative communities, there is a plenum of them, and some of them are real different from each other. But yeah, in art and amongst those who have made their art their career, or would really like to make their art a career, yeah, it can be very controversial to talk about money.
So what we're going to do, and I know that you and I have been having conversations. So I grew up a business owner and libertarian, so I thought in a very much business person way, but I didn't, and I thought I had a basic financial education. But when I came out of my martial arts school, and then I ended up going to grad school, my savings went away. And so I maybe came to my current job where I'm making decent money, okay money, way late to being able to build up a retirement, and I didn't think about it before. I was thinking like, as you get rich for my business, and then I'm good.
That'll scoot you away from libertarianism real quick, right?
Right, exactly. But what the other thing is, being a burner, this idea of radical self-reliance, I wanted to figure out, well, I didn't want to figure out. Actually, one of the people we're having on the podcast next week, we're going to have 3 people. We're going to have Corey Van Hooser, and he's the person who sat me down 3 years ago and reminded me about Bitcoin and Ethereum and cryptocurrency. And I had seen an article on Bitcoin back in 2011, and I actually spent probably a good 8 hours trying to figure out how to buy a Bitcoin, and I finally gave up. And I could have bought a Bitcoin with like $30 at that time.
Wow.
And then he told me how much Bitcoin was worth, and I think at that time it was up to 3,000. Today it's around 12, though it just kind of dropped again. And I'm like, and it just went through my head, because I was going to buy like 10 Bitcoin, what that would mean for me. And then he told me about Ethereum, which is another cryptocurrency, which is a programmable money. I'm not going to get into this deep. But the point was, I realized that this is so much bigger than Bitcoin. So I got into this whirlwind of high prices going from Bitcoin, went from 3,000 to 20,000, all these other coins, 50x. You got like the possibility for money that I had never thought was possible before. And so I dove into it, and I didn't lose anything. I ended up actually being very okay. I came out with the same amount of money I put in, but I stayed hooked. And all of a sudden I realized it's kind of like I got into meditation through Ashtanga yoga because I couldn't sit to meditate because I was too energetic. And now I teach people how to meditate. So cryptocurrency was exciting enough to get me to actually care about finance. And so I want to bring Corey on because he has a great mind for thinking about these things. And then we're going to be bringing on 2 other people I'm really excited about. They're both burners. One's a big part of the Lansing community, Jeff Dudewolf, and he started out in the story that he told me with $10,000 from his grandma, and he started flipping houses, and he's done very well for himself. And because of that, he's been able to add a lot of art to our community. And this is something that I really find about some other bigger cities like Toronto, Chicago, San Francisco, is that it's often the people who understand money that make big and powerful art possible. So why not understand money yourself?
Yeah, I'm at this point in my life now where it is so perfect for us to be having this conversation now, and as soon as we can sit down, I'm going to set up my Bitcoin wallet for the first time, and I'm gonna start. Maybe the word isn't taking money seriously, but really sincerely making an effort to be a financial force in the world, because I have tuned my instrument of my heart and my behavior where I feel I am confident that I will embody kindness in my community. And if the kind were a little wealthier now, I think that's gonna translate to a lot of good stuff happening in the world.
Right. And then the other person that, and that end I think is huge. The idea of the more that you have, the more that you can give. And I saw so many of my friends, part of the reason why I do what I do is because I feel very fulfilled in my day job. And I'm very much lucky enough that it makes me some money, because that allows me to put more money into art and in the community, which is my true passion. If I was busy trying to survive this late in my life, making art, I wouldn't be making art on the level that I hope to be, I have been, and I hope to be in the future. But yeah, and the other thing is, I think the thing that changed for me, and you kind of see me smiling a bit when I'm talking about this subject, Bitcoin made the concept of understanding money fun. If someone's going to sit down and play Candy Crush, and you're going to get, Candy? What do you get in Candy Crush? If you're going to sit down and play these puzzle games, if you're going to sit down and play D&D, if you're going to sit down and play something on PlayStation 4, you're figuring out a system, and you're figuring out how to have fun with it. But here's the thing. When you figure out this system, what you win is money and energy in your actual life. Not
freedom.
Freedom. and enough in a lifestyle that fits your values, because when you don't have to worry about where your meal's coming from, you don't have to worry about where your house is going to go your head. If there is a revolution, and I'm not in this position, but some people I know are, you can travel to the woods for a few weeks in your own property to be safe, or with a community, that's valuable, right? So again, talking about money and talking about how to make it fun and interesting, on one hand, and to understand that right now I seriously believe that, and we're going to talk about this next week, we're moving to we talked about the possibility of revolution. I think financially, things are going to occur in the next 2 to 9 months that most of us have not lived through, that maybe coming back to the 70s. So talking about how to understand money now to take advantage of that, because the most money is made at the bottom of an economic catastrophe. At that point, if this is where you can understand money and you can build your way out of that, or if you currently have money and don't understand financial education, how to protect what you have.
Yeah, I know many consciousnesses that upon hearing that, the economic opportunity is most present in a downturn would be like, that's if one is so lucky, so privileged to not be impoverished.
And here's the thing, is that when I was poor, I could have put more money away, and I really wish I did. And not poor in the systematic way, in the way that you're talking about, but there's an entire movement now on Twitter and on TikTok of people who grew up in those situations, who are trying to help people in those communities understand finance, because that is power. Whether you're in a socialist, a capitalist, no matter which direction we go, if you do not understand money, if you don't understand payday loans, if you don't understand credit cards, it's going to keep you impoverished.
Yeah, so. And you know that I just got. I know you're aware of this, but the one of the more widespread big conversations that I hope that we can have a felt understanding of it being a dialectic and not just a debate is that it doesn't have to be, are we going to become a socialist country, or are we going to, or must we conserve free market capitalism? It's like we're gonna figure out if there's such a thing as a sweet spot, or we're gonna find out what the problems are with either extremity. And then that might just be an ongoing conversation until we have a robot global governance that is ran on an artificial intelligence constitution.
And then finally, one other guest we're going to have next week is Sam Jones. He is also a burner. He started through internet marketing, but he found Bitcoin early. He's run mining rigs, and he has done very well for himself. And he is a person who's very much dedicated to also giving back to the community. So I think these are excellent people to talk to.
Yeah, I trust Sam.
Because they are creative individuals. They are individuals who've been working to understand this, to make it work for not just themselves, but the communities that they're a part of. And we want to share this with all of you.
Yeah. And so I would like to foreshadow that sometime down the road, I would like to have another podcast episode dedicated more specifically to treatment versus punishment on the individual level. Right now, we are in an era where it is very pertinent for us to talk about revolution versus evolution, trying to positively transform versus burn down our government. But I would really like to spend an entire episode talking about that on the individual level within yourself, and when you are confronted with a difficult person, because that on the individual level, or particularly within myself, I have found I don't need to punish myself anymore. I have such an intense Jiminy Cricket. I've got such a conscience that beats me up so bad when I fuck up, that external punishment is rarely necessary for me to have the sufficient amount of pain that is needed for me to try to self-correct. And I'm trying to figure out for myself if that is how I I like to avoid the word should, but should be towards others across the board, or just most of the time? Because I don't need to be punished for these little infractions, that I have. I need help. I need to help myself.
Yeah, we're wrapping up, but to my end, I think there's different ways to reality check people, and different people, just like different people have different love languages, different people have different, you need to look at this languages.
Yeah. And some, especially somebody who is, clinically sociopathic, it's like that needs to be practical, right? It needs to be like, oh man,
Yes.
every time I do this, I get burned.
Yes.
As where,
I lose opportunities, I lose freedom, I lose these things that I enjoy. It's actually more the path.
Yeah. So anyway, I think this has been a great conversation.
Definitely.
And I got shouty. Oh wow.
A little intense.
But we're in a place. We are in a difficult spot that is going to take tremendous effort, and I think patience and love and compassion in order for us to effectively usher in the brightest future.
Yeah.
I think I believe in a brighter future, but I don't know how long and how much more catastrophe it's going to take to get there.
Right.
Yeah, I think we need to be careful and kind and intelligence. I think that kindness is intelligence. I am Zachary Winchester.
And I'm Eric Miller.
And this has been
Paradialectic.
another episode of the Paradialectic Podcast.